if you're highly controlling or you have favorites or you share, people often, they don't realize they're doing it, but they'll like pick the person that they're going to share information with. And so then everyone else knows that that's the person who has power, and you've set up this whole dynamic. You're going to get gossip.
Just said that there's infinite potential in everyone. And personally, as an entrepreneur, I have experienced giving chances, like multiple chances to a couple of people, and even placing them in different seats in the bus. But it didn't work out. And have you encountered that kind of situation where the best thing to do is to just part ways and say that it didn't work?
Absolutely. And I've done that with clients as well. And that's part of my process, has been really understanding like who I want to do business with, and being a little, I don't say ruthless is the wrong word, but recognizing, really like having a very clear idea of what's important, what I bring to the table. So as an employer, like if I really want this person to work for me, what am I giving them so that this makes sense, we're both creating value, and we're going to have that symbiotic relationship. Some people, like I would say, there's someone else's Prince Charming, someone else's Princess Charming. Set them free. Often that when you're moving somebody around is they need it's the wrong question, right? So I've had this sometimes where they'll be like, well, I'm going to move this person from here to here. I'm like, okay, but have you sat down with them and asked them, like, what do you want? What are you most interested in? What is the greatest challenge you're facing right now? And it's like, no, but they're really organized, so I think they'd be really good in finance. And it's like, but they may have no interest in that. Or they may want to impress you, or they may want to please you, so they'll say yes to anything. And really, they just don't have the technical skills for any of these things. Or there are people who they really do want a lot of direction. And if you know at a small business that you cannot provide that's not what you're going to do, it's totally fine to go with somebody and say, hey, I want to support you. Where can I write recommendations for you? Can I connect you with people? Because a lot of times what I find is somebody will be like, well, I don't want, if I fire them, I don't want to, I'm like, give them severance. I was like, give everybody severance. And it's like, I don't want to do that. It was like, what are you talking about? You're going to let them stink at their job for 6 months and then have a really awkward period where then you're worried that they're going to sue you. And I mean, in America, that's a big issue. They're going to sue you if you fire them, when you could have kindly helped them and given them 2 or 3 months severance, and they would have left saying you're the best boss they ever had. Yeah. I mean, like, sometimes I don't understand. And that's part of it for me to kind of step back and go, just because I don't understand doesn't mean that, like, I have to be really kind. And that's the coaching part, is to be like, there's stuff going on in your head. I don't know. And so I'm here to help you come to these understandings, because I can say that over and over again. I can send you to a seminar. I can write a book about it. But until you've had that moment where you go, this is the criteria. This isn't working out. And it's not their fault. It takes two to tango. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do whatever I can to transition them out, be as kind as possible, be fair to the employees who aren't leaving, and make sure that they know that they're going to get treated well if they ever want to leave, and cross that off the list.
Right. Fantastic. So what I'm wondering about, Keziha, is, so you've been talking about how you're advising business owners to be better in terms of letting go of people and how to let go of people, the best way to do it. And I could sense that you've had experience with business owners who just wouldn't budge. And what do you do? I mean, I'm sure they have some form of KPIs in their head about your output as they get you as their consultant and coach. And what do you do if that isn't met, but it isn't your fault? It's because they just wouldn't listen and they're too hard-headed.
Well, it is my fault that I took a client I didn't do a good enough job screening in. So I almost all of my clients, not all of them, sometimes they're bad they don't screen out well. But a lot of clients will be like, well, I'm really good at screening out. And I was like, but you're not screening in. So I actually have, I have a workshop I did recently on identifying and attracting ideal clients. I'm going to be expanding that later in the summer into a multi-week course that looks at client attraction, how you create value, how you price. It's specifically for people who are in service, in kind of service businesses, like say graphic designers or consultants or things like that. And really like where you put the paywall in terms of how you create value. But the biggest thing is you don't have to exit people if you do a better job bringing them in. And the cost of a false positive, right? I think that we have a lot of false negatives in society. There's a lot of people who get kicked out, especially we're seeing that a lot in the US. We're going through a real crisis of conscience about how specifically like white people, but all people who are not Black kind of have this inherent, these very strong biases against Black people, and that means that there's a lot of we kick them out of the system. They don't get interviewed for jobs. So I do think there's a lot of negative. It's really dangerous to like just say, hey, we're only worried about false positives. However, as an individual, if you're really clear in your criteria, you're much less likely to have your false negatives because you actually are looking for the right thing, and you'll check yourself. You'll be like, why am I reacting poorly to this client? Let me just make sure that where this is coming from. And you won't have the false positives because the amount of mental energy that one bad client or bad fit in an employee it just consumes you. And you think you're not making sales calls. You're not doing development you're not doing new product ideation. You're not supporting the rest of your team because you're so fixated and obsessed with like handling the emotional exhaustion related to this other person. And so the piece we were talking about before is how do you gracefully exit? Because you're going to do the same thing with a client or a customer that doesn't work. You got to figure out how to gracefully exit them. The biggest thing you can do is stop taking them in.
So it sounds to me that you influence the hiring process as well. And that is pretty tough. So what is the number one wrong thing that you think clients that you have are doing when it comes to the hiring process, and how do you fix that?
So there's two things that I see a lot of. One is looking for credentials. So, and I get that. I mean, hey, look, I play off it. I went to Stanford and Wharton. I don't know in the Philippines whether those have any brand cachet, but they're fairly big brand cachet.
They are big, yeah.
Yeah, in the States. So I know that there are people who will show me more respect and will assume that I know things because I went to these fancy schools. And I will tell you 99% of what I learned was not in either of those places in the academics of it, right? I learned a ton of things from people. But, like the things that bring to bear here were learned like on the street in like real work and in the interpersonal relationships. So, and exactly as an entrepreneur, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, I got almost kicked out of school with 28 failing units. And I studied like you. It could be compared to a Wharton or Stanford. I studied in De La Salle University, which is one of the top 3 schools here. But man, I didn't learn anything from like 1%. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I agree with you totally.
So we look a lot in hiring to these credentials. Did you work often? Did you work at Amazon? So let's say I'm trying to hire, I'm at a startup and I'm like, did you work at Google? And it's like, well, working at Google is a real different than working at a startup. Like, so again, that process, which you can use with clients, you can use with network partners, you can use it honestly in relationships, the screening, like what am I looking for? And then what do I bring into, I don't do, relationship coaching, but people can use it for that. This process that I've developed works really well for hiring because you get to the core of what you really want. And often that'll help you with the stuff like screening out people who didn't go to a fancy college or who didn't go to college at all. Or you start to understand like, okay, is that actually important? So it allows you to be a little bit more flexible, which often in the US we'll say I can't get good candidates. So that's one. The other one is you got to pay people. Like you have to provide something of value to them. And that's like, sometimes I'm like, you are as the business owner, you guys are mutual clients. So you pay them for value that they create for you. They show up and bring their energy and focus and dedication in exchange for the value you provide to them. And if you don't understand what value you're providing to your employees, and often people will be like, well, I'll throw more money at them. And it's like, well, maybe that's not what they need. Maybe what they need is you to hire 2 or 3 more people, take the workload down and do a better job managing the organization. So I often find that people are either trying to throw money at they're typically trying to throw money at their existing employees to get them because they're leaving, jumping ship, and then they're underpaying their new people. And it's like, let's normalize this and let's actually focus on what people want. So you kind of think of it from those two things. One is, what do I really need? So it starts to let you cross off all the stuff that you thought was important. And then looking at, what do I provide to them? And then the third layer is just being really aware, like if you can possibly do name and gender and all that blind applications. It's very hard because it's very informal typically with smaller businesses, call it gray market jobs. If you can scrape those off in terms of when applications come in, there's just well-documented bias. If somebody's got a foreign name, if they're a woman, there's just like where we just like the same resume will be really interpreted differently. And that just reduces the quality of your pool because you basically took very qualified candidates. That's the false negative part. So I'm like, just let's make sure. And even when you write your job description, if you're posting, there's a bunch of like apps and stuff, and you can certainly bring a hiring consultant. I know a little bit. I'm more likely to outsource that if it's really important, to make sure you're not putting language in. People often talk about culture fit. And the truth is, when you say, well, what is your culture? It's like, well, do we all get along? And I'm like, yeah, but you get along with people who look like you. That's like, so you're just going to hire a bunch of people like you if that's your criteria. And investors do this too. Like, oh, I want to go to the pub. Do I want to go out for drinks with you? And it's like, that's what's relevant to whether or not somebody's going to be a good employee or a good. So there is also some education there. I'm not an expert. They're great resources. If it's a larger business, I might bring in a consultant to help with that. But a lot of that is also just getting in touch with what's most important to you. And when you say culture fit, usually what you mean is, what does that mean? Oh, what's your culture? Oh, I don't actually know what my culture is. Okay. Oh, well, let's talk about how you want to structure your culture and how you want to create that, because that's part of what you're offering the employee in exchange for their time and service. So I'm a whiteboarder, so that's why I'm like, I could draw this out for you. It's a little, I'm kind of going, I know I go all over when I'm talking.
But yeah, no,
it's a lot in that.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I'm learning, and I'm sure the listeners are going to be getting a lot from this. And so my next question is going to be jumping off from that, and that's about culture. See, a lot of business owners are struggling with culture. What is it? Because you can't put it on paper. You can't feel it. You can't smell it. But once you enter the office of a certain company that's intentional about building their culture, you just know. You just sort of feel it. So I'm wondering, how are you able to influence these small to medium business owners that you're working with in being more intentional about their culture? And how do you describe it to them that this is necessary? This has ROI. It's just that we can't attribute it on paper. How do you do that?
Well, there are two elements. So some of it's, kind of like feng shui or vastu or those where, there's all these rules, but also we all know what it's like to walk into a space that feels good, right? That has good design, where it's something that you can kind of navigate, right? And it feels good. And I think the biggest thing that I work on with people is like, what are the things about this business that you need to feel good, and keeping in mind the bias issues, right? But what are the things that like should feel good? So a lot of it is, we often think of culture as being this like, as you're saying, it's amorphous, but that's downstream effect. Like if you go to a place where it's disorganized and people, no one knows what they're supposed to do, you're going to get like, bad culture out of that, right? Like if you're highly controlling or you have favorites, or you share, people often, they don't realize they're doing it, but they'll like pick the person that they're going to share information with. And so then everyone else knows that that's the person who has power, and you've set up this whole dynamic. You're going to get gossip because everybody's trying to figure out who has power. So there's a lot of it, which is actually, if you're more intentional about how you just structure like information sharing, decision making is a big one. Like honestly, people think a great culture, it's usually not like the free beer or whatever. The great culture is feeling like somebody cares that I like about my opinion. Like I'm being asked places where I have expertise, someone is asking me. If I don't have expertise, someone is trying to help me develop it. So I think a lot of that, actually the stuff of culture, is an outgrowth of running a business well. So typically when I'm looking at someone and saying, yeah, we want the culture to be good, but what you're often, when you say culture, you often mean, hey, do I want to hang out with these people? That's going to lead you straight into being biased to hiring everybody who's like your friends, which we all know, having been in business, everyone's been in a business with a friend who's an entrepreneur and knows that is not good criteria, right? It's not a good idea to hire your friends, right?
I agree.
It works out once in a while and we'll always be like, look, it's Sergey and blah, blah, blah. And like it happens once in a while. The rest of the time, it's usually a debacle. So
Yeah.
you're not trying to like build a culture that's about us. Hey, we're all buddies. What you're trying to do is build that culture where we really like celebrate the best work. We know what the criteria are for it. And everybody is here on a common purpose. So I go back to what are your goals as a business owner? What's the mission of the business? And then are you attracting people who are on par with that mission? Are you attracting people? Do you know what their personal goals are? And are you creating a culture? Like the culture is then being like, can people make mistakes in your business? What happens if someone makes a mistake? What's your feedback process? Is it fair? I mean, the number of times I've gone in larger companies and they'll be like, well, we do like a review every once in a while. We have a form somewhere. And it's always like, there's someone in HR who does this. You're like, you have 200 employees. Like, what are you talking about? But you're so busy, like really so busy growing the business. So as a business owner, I'm kind about that, but I'm also like, hey, look, everybody in here is a white guy that you know from church. Okay, you're not going to get a lot of diversity of thought in this pool because you're already in agreement about so many things. So going into that and letting them see. So I wish I could tell you I got some clear definition of culture, but it really is usually an outgrowth of the business being run well.
Right. Someone once said that culture is the result of processes that you put in and mixed with your core values and your mission and your vision statement. So it is
very wise person. That's why I always tell people every good idea has already been had. Every bad idea has already been had. But yeah, I just talked for a couple of minutes and somebody else has had this idea.